Papias maintained that the Gospel of Mark was simply a collection of Peter's discourses or his preaching, as this information was received and recalled by Mark. If we examine the typical preaching style of Peter, as it is seen in the book of Acts, look at Acts chapter 1 verses 21 to 22 and Acts chapter 10 verses 37 to 41 for example. We can see that Peter always limited his preaching to the public life, death, resurrection and ascension of Jesus. Now compare this to the Gospel of Mark. It's interesting that Mark's Gospel omits the private birth narrative and other details of Jesus' private life that are found in the opening chapters of Luke and Matthew. Mark begins with the preaching of John the Baptist and ends with the resurrection and ascension. It parallels the public preaching of Peter, as we see it summarized in the book of Acts. There are many details in the Gospel of Mark that reflect Peter's special input and influence. If we study the Gospel, we will notice that there are many apparent omissions in the Gospel of Mark that specifically deal with Peter himself. How can Mark be a memoir of Peter if, in fact, the book contains so many omissions of events that involve Peter specifically? It's important to evaluate the entire catalog of omissions that pertain to Peter to understand the answer here. As it turns out, the patron omissions involve an effort on the part of the author to either minimize embarrassment to Peter, or to humbly and referentially limit the prominence of Peter. A close examination of these omissions reveals that the vast majority of them are incidents in which Peter did or said something that was rash or embarrassing. It's not surprising then, that these details were omitted by the author, who wanted to protect Peter's standing in the Christian community. Mark was quite discreet in his retelling of the narrative. Other Gospel writers, who were present at the time do provide details of Peter's indiscretions in their own accounts. Here are some examples of patron omissions that were grounded in an effort to minimize embarrassment to Peter. Take a look at the way that Luke describes the initial calling of Peter, Andrew, John and James.
One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen, who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him.
You may have noticed that Peter finds himself both embarrassed and ashamed that he doubted the power and identity of Jesus until it had to be demonstrated to him with a miraculous catch. If he wanted to tell the same story and leave out the embarrassing part, it might sound a lot like the version found in Mark's Gospel.
As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat preparing their nets. Without delay he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him.
Let's examine the passages of Scripture that describe Jesus' healing of the woman who suffered from bleeding. Mark's version of this story describes a rather rash and sarcastic comment on the part of the disciples.
When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you?" His disciples answered. "And yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering."
This statement on the part of the disciples seems rather disrespectful, doesn't it? It's as if they are saying, "Hey Jesus, you're asking us to tell you who touched you, but are you blind? Look at all these people. How are we supposed to know who touched you?" Mark fails to mention who actually said this, but the Gospel of Luke tells us who it was.
As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace."
Once again, Mark's Gospel omits a detail that is embarrassing to Peter, namely his identity, as the man who made this statement in the first place. In a similar way, Mark again protects Peter when describing Jesus' teaching related to a parable.
Again Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them." After he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. "Are you so dull?" he asked. "Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body." In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean.
Notice here that Mark says that all the disciples began to question Jesus about the parable, and Jesus then challenged all of them, asking them if they all lacked understanding. Mark also says that the result of Jesus' proclamation in the parable was that he affirmed that all foods were clean. Now compare this passage to the parallel account in Matthew's Gospel.
Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen and understand. What goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them." Then the disciples came to him and asked, "Do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this?" He replied, "Every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by the roots. Leave them, they are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit." Peter said, "Explain the parable to us." "Are you still so dull?" Jesus asked them. "Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them."
Notice here that Matthew tells us that it was Peter specifically who asked the question that drew the disparaging response from Jesus. Are you, Peter, still lacking in understanding also? Mark protects Peter by omitting his name from the account,